turn to the problem of water and other services. No secret that many of our local municipalities are in crisis, be it a crisis of leadership, finances or crumbling infrastructure. We just heard with the DG of Water, Dr. Tshwane Phillips, or in fact all three. But it is another level of crisis when one of the richest cities in the country, and the capital no less, is grappling to manage cholera. The death toll from cholera in Hammanskraal is at 23, but with a history of water problems in this area for years now, it's perhaps not surprising it's come to this. The city and the National Department of Water and Sanitation are working together to try and fix the problem. But as we heard from the DG just moments ago, it's going to cost several billions, and it's going to be 9 months to a year at least before the people of Hammanskraal can open their taps and safely drink the water. There's no cholera present in that water, he tells us, but it's not safe to drink because it's full of another bacteria, E. coli. Let's speak now to local government specialist, Professor Erwin Schwella from Stellenbosch University. Prof, thank you so much for joining us. If you look at the situation in Hammanskraal, do you just see it as a clear failure of local government? Because ultimately they're responsible for delivering those services to people, or is that too narrow a view?
Yes, I think we should start by saying that service delivery is in itself a set of complicated issues which, in combination with bad governance, with neglect, lack of maintenance, improper financial management in terms of both corruption and wasting, then becomes a very big complex problem. This is the result of years of neglect, and it's neglect across the spectrum of the system. We have not seen over the years that these wastewater treatment areas were properly maintained. The President today in his newsletter says that they will hold people responsible and probably accountable, but these things have been known for many years. And it's not only Tshwane. You can go and look at areas around Mfuleni and many other places where we now find that this is the result of bad governance, impossible lacks in planning, bad maintenance, and finally, one can say this is also a symbolic indication of the, shall we say, disastrous leadership that we've seen over many years now.
To what extent are the problems, let's use Hammanskraal as the most pertinent example, perhaps a sign that local government doesn't have the skills, perhaps doesn't even have the budget? Because what we're seeing is national government having to come in, go to Treasury, get the money and fix it. Do you think that there needs to be a bit of a rejig in who does what? I'm getting a sense from speaking to Tshwane Phillips, the DG of the Department of Water, that they are looking at slight changes in how this whole complicated system works.
Yes, well, let's start with the municipal financial system. There are sources of income which comes on the side of the operational budget, which we all pay for. That's taxes, it's licensing fees, it's fines that municipalities can get. And in the past, they also used to have some form of profit on the electricity accounts, which are now under pressure. But every year there's also a fairly large grant from central government, because local governments do not have enough income from tax bases in their own communities. And that is specifically a basic infrastructure grant. Now, in order to plan long-term infrastructural projects, such as, for example, sewage systems, water systems, that takes time. It takes many years. And you get that income grant, but if you don't spend it, you lose it. And in many of these cases, you will find that those infrastructural grants were not spent on what they were supposed to be spent on. And the result is that the badly maintained plants, then linked to a lack of planning and maintenance, have actually deteriorated to such an extent that it is now very expensive to replan and rebuild it. In some cases, what you've got on the site now is not an asset, it's a liability, because you actually have to break everything down before you can start building something new. So this is the type of thing that happens if you don't have competent officials, if you have continuous conflict in the council about positions of power. And it's not only last 2 years with coalition government. Coalition governments might have even made it better because there were then other people involved. But for years, under the rule of the previous council in Tshwane, and maybe the current mayor of Tshwane says even the DA government, or as he calls it, the coalition government. But for long, the rulers in Tshwane has neglected their functions in terms of all of the legislation, and now we have to hold them accountable, but it's too late. We have now got deaths. This results in death.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is the tragic reality, that the ultimate failure to deliver services in this case has resulted in death. We don't know the source of the outbreak, but clearly from what Dr. Sean Phillips was saying is it's so through the system that it would have been all too easy to pick it up. And he certainly hasn't ruled out that possibly there was contamination with the tankers, which is something Anthony Turton, water specialist, was talking about on eNCA this morning. So to quote Bob the Builder, I mean, can we fix it? Because it seems it's going to take an awful lot of money that we in South Africa simply don't have. If Hammanskraal alone is going to take a few billion, and we've got 30% of our municipalities in a similar crisis, surely we're going to have to look outside our country. And I'm thinking of the Lesotho Highlands Water Project. It's about to go into phase 2, and the big funders there, China, they're going to be helping to build the new dam. Is that the kind of future we're looking at, that it's ultimately all going to have to privatise, big companies, even countries coming in to help fix this?
Well, it's obvious that the current local government system, by the way, it works very well in some places. It's not everywhere that it's a disaster. So obviously there's something that is linked to bad governance and bad leadership. If it works in some places, it's the same system. Why doesn't it work in other places? And that bad governance is about corruption and wastage. But now you've got the disaster in those areas. Now, what do you have to do? You have to find financing. And the current financial models, if they were properly implemented in terms of using the infrastructure grants over many years, for example, if you had competent people in the engineering positions in Tshwane, in the Tshwane local government, then it would have been better. However, once you go past the tipping point, then it takes more money to repair the failures of the previous system. Then you have to think about innovative governance. And that means that you have to find funding. There might be funding in international sources, but of course, we know that, we should be very careful of taking funding from international sources, because generally that is dangerous. When our rand value goes down, then those debts become very hard to service, and you take a bigger part to pay the debts, whether it's Chinese yuans or American dollars, it doesn't matter. What we also need is we need to have the private sector and the communities involved themselves. And in many ways, that will call for serious governance innovation, but it will not, like the electricity crisis. Anthony Turton was right. Water will be the next big issue. And here it is now. It's not scarcity per se, but if it's polluted, it's also scarce. So we are going to have this battle at many fronts, and international funding might be available, but it comes at a cost. We need to have governance innovation. We've got to get our private sector involved and our communities involved. In actual fact, we should also have big civic education programs for people not to damage and to, in some ways, vandalize the place.
Yeah.
So we all have to get involved. And the last thing we need now is more conflict about whether I hold the speaker's position or you hold the mayor's position, or you are, trying to drive a political ideology from the provincial governance sphere or the central governance sphere. It seems as if the leadership is now saying, I hear those particular points being made by leaders across the board now. Yeah. We will have to work together and stop the nonsense.
It's actually probably the one positive that has come out of this, is seeing these leaders across the political divide speaking with one voice. Let's hope it holds, because of course we've got an election coming up, in probably less than a year now, just over a year. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Local Government Specialist Professor Erwin Schwella from Stellenbosch University. Stay with us on SA Tonight. We've got